Hi, I'm Stephen McNally. I'm a black and white landscape photographer, and I'm really excited today to be demonstrating long exposure technique on this shoot, and I'd like to thank Wex and Canon for inviting me along to do this shoot today. I'm going to show you how to create black and white fine art images on the grounds here at U Brighton. So if you'd like to see any of my work, you can find me on Flickr at Stephen McNally, on Facebook at Stephen McNally Photography, or on my own personal Facebook page, Stephen McNally, or on my website at Stephen McNally Photography, and my Instagram page at Stephen McNally. If you Google them, you should be able to find most of my work out there. If there's any questions that you would like when I'm doing this shoot, just put them down below and I will try and answer all your questions. I am a self-taught photographer. I started photography late on in my life. I didn't start it early. I work as a hairdresser in the week, and I needed a hobby to get me out and get me outdoors at the weekend. My brother was a photographer, and tragically he died at a young age of 36. And my mother gave me all this photography equipment, but I didn't know how to use it. And so for a few years it just sat there gathering dust. So I bought my first digital camera, which is a Canon 450D, and I learnt how to use that camera by reading magazines, going on the internet, learning how to do composition. Like most people, I would get up in the early hours of the morning, go out shooting sunrises, go at night time shooting sunsets, and from there my photography developed. I used to put my pictures on Flickr and other social media sites, and the encouragement I got from other people who saw them images made me carry this on. But I started to feel that I wasn't really getting as much out of my hobby as I could. So I was looking around to do a particular niche of photography, to do a particular subject that I could specialise in. I began to study long exposure techniques, learning how to see a composition in black and white, what composition works in black and white, and how to successfully create a long exposure technique. The camera is an amazing tool. We can't see with our eyes what the camera can catch in a long exposure. The surreal images that you can create with a long exposure is what captivated me and made me do this as a subject. How I got into long exposure photography, I read an article about a photographer that didn't live too far away from where I live in Newells, and this photographer came from Widnes, and his name was Michael Kenner. And in the article in the magazine, he was having an exhibition in his own town of Widnes, which I went to, and his pictures blew me away. These pictures were what I wanted to do as a photographer. They were amazing, and his long exposure techniques, he created some fantastic pictures. So I actually went 3 times to that exhibition, and they so inspired me to do black and white landscape photography and do long exposures. And my work got seen by magazines and got published, and I got invited to publish on websites, and I got invited to publish my work to exhibit my work in galleries. I've had exhibitions. My local authority has bought some of my work for their collection. And so, as an encouragement to people who, like me, have only started out late in photography, it's never too late to do anything. It's a subject that you can start and learn and find enjoyment from. I mean, it's come a second career for me, and as I'm nearing my retirement age, it's something that I'll be able to do as an hobby and enjoy when I'm retired, and get out and keep myself active and keep myself fit in a way. I'm going to be shooting with the Canon R6, and I've got on the Canon mount adapter for the EF EOS R, which has got my 16-35 wide-angled Canon lens on, f4L. This is my workhorse lens. This is the 24-105, and this is probably what I shot 70% of my portfolio with. It's a great lens, it's very robust. I should know I've dropped it a few times, and it takes excellent sharp pictures. It's a really great, if you're just going out and you just want to take one lens with you, this is the lens that you need to take. This is excellent for long exposure photography. Also, on my shoots, if I need to zoom in and isolate an image, or do a minimalist photo, especially in the water, in the sea or things like that, I've got this 70-200 f4L. This is great for zooming in and taking really close-up shots and getting really, especially using on waterfalls where you can zoom in close into a waterfall and pick out a feature and minimalise that shot in the landscape. Great for picking out trees in the distance, minimalising the landscape. So they're the my main workhorses of my bag. Also, as a backup, I carry a Canon 60D, just in case my other camera doesn't work. I have shot most of my portfolio on that camera. It's an excellent camera and it takes excellent photographs. As a black and white landscape photographer who do long exposures, there's one thing that you do need, and that is neutral density filters. You will need a 10-stop and a filter holder to cut down the amount of light that's going into the camera to enable you to do the long exposure. So in my bag I carry a 10-stop, a 16-stop, they're the square neutral density filters. I also carry round 10-stop filters which can go on the end of the camera. I also carry a 6-stop neutral density filter if I don't want the exposures too long, like if I want to catch streaking waves going back into the sea, just to give me a couple of seconds of exposure. I also carry soft Grad filters, and these Grad filters will go over the top of the 10-stop filter and just cut out a little bit more light to give a little bit more definition in the sky and in the clouds. And one of the best filters that I carry, because I go out mainly at sunrise and sunset, is a reverse Grad filter. So at that time of the day, the brightest point is always on the horizon. So this reverse Grad filter will cut out the sun and give me a bit longer time to get more long exposures as the sun rises or the sun sets. When you're doing long exposure photography, there's an essential piece of equipment that you need, and that's a good sturdy tripod. Because what you don't want to happen when your camera's exposing, which could be for 2, 3 minutes, 20 minutes, you don't want that camera to move and have a nasty blurry mess. So you need a really strong sturdy tripod like this Manfrotto tripod. And also, to activate the shutter when you're in bulb mode, you need a cable release, because you don't want to be pressing the shutter with your finger and creating a vibration on the camera as the shutter goes. On the R6, you can also use your mobile phone to activate the shutter by the Bluetooth connection from Canon Connect on the Canon Connect app. Or on the R6 you can use the bulb timer and dial in your exposure time and then set the exposure off. We're here today at New Brighton. This is a planned shoot. Normally I do 2 plans. I plan for a coastal shoot and a landscape shoot, and then I check the weather in the morning, which is the best location to go to. And today we're here at New Brighton to do a shot of the groins. We should have done this shoot 2 days ago, but we had 40-mile-an-hour gale winds, horizontal rain, so obviously we couldn't do a shoot in them conditions. We've got not near perfect conditions. I would have preferred more cloud in the background, a bit more cloud cover to get the nice streaks that you would get with long exposures, but we can work with that. We'll smooth out the sea and create a surreal world that long exposures create. Your eye never sees that, the camera can capture that, and that's why I love doing long exposures. You don't really know what shot you're going to get, what the camera is going to capture until you've actually finished the shot. And it's always a great surprise to see the image that you captured. When you come out to a coastal location to do a long exposure shoot, always check the tides and be careful about where you're shooting. It's always best to shoot on an outgoing tide and follow the tide out for safety. But if you can't do that and you shoot on an incoming tide, be aware of your surroundings and be aware that the tide can come behind you and cut you off. You can easily get distracted while you're working and doing your workflow and doing your long exposures. So as a safety precaution, always be aware of your surroundings and take care. On an incoming tide, just be careful with your tripod. When you place your tripod in the beach, the incoming tide pushes water in front of it under the sand. And what happens to your tripod during your exposure, it slowly sinks. So that will create a little bit of blurriness and you'll lose sharpness on your picture. So you're better off trying to shoot on an outgoing tide where the water's going away from you and the land's firmer and it's holding your tripod firmer and stable. So before you start shooting your long exposure, there's a few things that you've got to do to set your camera up. One of the things to do is click the AF off and put the lens into manual. Because when you put your 10 stop on, your camera's not going to get much light and the focal point is going to start hunting. And also, if your camera's got image stabilization like this 124-105 has, you also need to turn that off too, and so there's no image stabilization. And also on the R6, which has inbuilt camera image stabilization built into it, you also need to disable that, so you don't want any movement of the camera at all during the exposure. There are various ways of taking a long exposure. You can use your own camera's meter, and so you take your 10 stop off, meter your shot, and that meter reading is giving me an exposure of 1/8 of a second. There are various apps available. We're using a 10 stop filter to work out that time difference. So 1/8 of a second gives me 13 seconds of an exposure with a 10 stop. So I'll put the filter back on and fire that shot off. So that's going to give me an 8 to 10 second exposure. I'm just going to take a meter reading. I've set up at f16 and just going to read at what meter reading it is at the front of the groins. That's giving me a meter reading of 125. So just going to put on 10 stop. So a 125 reading will give me an 8 second exposure, but I'm just going to push it a little bit further past that. I'm going to give it about 15 seconds just to push it to the right. I shoot all my pictures in RAW, and when I get back home in post-production I collect as much data as I can during the long exposure, and then I can pull that back and see what sort of image that I've got. So I'm just going to fire off now and shoot that shot. I'm using the Canon Connect app off my phone to activate the camera. My f-stop is f16 and my ISO is 100. And I've got an interval timer of 2 seconds so I don't get no shake in the shot. So I'm just going to take the shot now, and the timer's going to kick in. As you can see up at the top, I can time my shot there. It's 4:05. I'm going to give it about 20 minutes of an exposure, and hopefully I should get a nice shot. So I've taken my shot. As you can see on my histogram, all the data is pushed over to the right hand side. I've slightly pushed it over to the right hand side, so back in post processing when I come to edit this shot, I can drag that back to the left and get a perfect exposure and get a better long exposure time, smoothing out the waves, making the mist of the waves around the groins, creating a surreal type, ephemeral type shot. As I'm a black and white landscape photographer, sometimes I change my picture style, I'll change it into monochrome so I can see what the shot will look like, and that gives me a monochrome look and an idea of how to take the shot. With the guys being made of concrete, it has a nice texture to the picture, and it gives that grime look of a black and white image. Always keep shooting, keep taking shots. Not every shot's going to be a good shot. You know when you've got your shot of the day. So keep going and keep shooting and apply it, and one of the shots will turn out to be the pick of the day, and I'll show you that shot. I always try to get my shots right in camera to save on editing time back home, and so don't get it always right straight out of camera, but if I've got to spend 10 minutes on editing a picture to get a good long exposure, I tend to normally bin it. So if you can get your shot right in the first place coming out the camera, you save yourself a lot of work and you enjoy your photography more. You want to be out taking pictures, you don't want to be sat in front of the computer doing editing work. Just taking this shot now using what remains of a groin here and these 3 groins, going out to the horizon, using the cloud at the top. I'm going to give it round about 20 seconds of an exposure. At f16, it's going to be pushed over to the right a little bit on the histogram, but in post-production it gives me enough data to draw that image out and work with it to create a decent picture and get a nice black and white fine art image. So I've taken the shot and the long exposure has completely smoothed out the sea, giving me a nice like as though the water's been turned into ice, totally flat, nice and calm. The lips of the groins are all appearing, so it gives me something to work to. The texture of the concrete and everything will work in the black and white image that I'm going to produce of this location. I've just moved in closer to take a photograph of these groins here, and by zooming in I'm going to isolate one of the groins close in and smooth out all that water. The concrete and the barnacles and that will give me a texture which will give me a good fine art black and white image. One of the things I do with my black and white photography is I tend to crop my pictures square. So I ignore what's on the outside of the frame. If I'm doing a square shot, I just shoot what's in the middle and then crop out the outsides. As I keep that as part of my portfolio, I have quite a lot of square images in my portfolio. One of the tips I can give you is keep the eyepiece covered, put a bit of cloth, or I carry a bit of insulation tape, which I tape across the eyepiece, just to cut out the light that can leak into the camera from outside, especially in bright conditions like today. When you get back home, you'll have really good long exposures and no weird light ruining the shot that you can't use. Another thing that you can do is, with this camera, you can turn on noise reduction. And what that will do, it will take, if you do a 20-second exposure, it will shoot another 20-second exposure, but of a black screen. And what that will do then, it will merge the two pictures together and reduce any noise that's in your camera. But on really long exposures, you've got to take into account, if you're doing a 20-minute exposure, it's another 20 minutes again before you can take another shot. So short exposures, yeah, use noise reduction, but in really long exposures, I don't tend to use it. I just go with the shot, and if you have to do, I'll use noise reduction software back in post editing. Right, so just to recap, I normally shoot between f11 and f16 in my shots. Turn off image stabilization, shooting manual, always shooting bulb mode, a sturdy tripod, a cable release, so we don't get no shake, no vibration while the exposure is taking. And I also turn on my highlight alert. So when I process the shot and I get blinkies in the clouds and things like that, I know how far I can push my shot before I've over-processed it. That is not my normal workflow of how I work when I take a long exposure. A big tip from me in how to be successful at doing long exposure is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Getting out there and taking the image, taking the shot, finding out what works, finding out the compositions, working the composition, working the location. Get there early. Walk round, before you've even set your camera up, walk round, look at the shot, have a look at what you're going to be shooting. I did that this morning. I got here early, walked round and we did the shot. A great video to watch is by Amy Bateman, and that's Photographing British Farmland, where she shows some interesting images of her farm and the area that she lives, and shooting some of the animals that's on her farm and the lovely scenery in the Lake District. And if you'd like to see some more images, if you can hashtag Wex Masterclass long exposure, and I'll hopefully be able to see them on Instagram. So this is Stephen McNally. If you want to connect with me and keep in touch, you can contact me through my website, through my Facebook page, through my Flickr account. And if you need any help, just give us a shout out, just give us a call, and I'll answer any of your queries. And even if you want to meet up, if you're in my location and you want to meet up, I'll come and meet you and we'll do some long exposure photography together. That's how I am. Thank you very much for watching this.